My name is Lily Pierce. I'm 27 years old. I'm a lay servant in the United Methodist Church and I have a disability called Friedreich's ataxia that does affect my speech, as you've likely already noticed. Today's plants of the day are air plants. I got these from Bella's Bloom Shop, and this is an example of what you might call one of the premium air plants. And then they were having a sale on defective ones, which to me, they look only very slightly imperfect. So here's a defective one, and here's a defective one, here's a defective one, and one more. I love air plants and they're really easy to care for. The only way I've killed them is to take care of them too much. So really good for beginners and people who don't have a lot of time to mess with plants. So today we're going to be covering a couple of really controversial recent headlines, and they're both instances that confirm the confirmation bias of conservatives. One of these instances is deserving of outrage, while the other is essentially manufactured moral panic. So let's get into it. First up is a bit of diversity training that was going on at the Coca-Cola company. Since this story broke, the company has clarified that this is actually part of a larger learning curriculum that was on LinkedIn called Better Together, and it was based on the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I actually own this book, but I haven't read it yet, and when I do, I'd love to make a video that is dissecting the good and the bad of it. But I will say this about it. On the one hand, I agree that white people, by and large, are kind of fragile. If you don't believe me, try telling the average white American conservative that people of color experience issues directly related to their skin color.
Well, I've been a victim of racism too.
Or just mention the term white privilege in general.
I've worked my off for everything I've ever gotten in life.
It's not that the two responses I gave are incorrect, it's just that even if they are true, they don't negate the things that they're supposedly rebutting. But anyway, on the other hand, it's been rightly pointed out that DiAngelo is a white woman who's profiting off the racism against black people and crafting this whole business empire on these overpaid racial consultants that are being hired by CEOs to come make companies. I don't know, her motives might be extremely noble, but it is a little sus. Anyway, some of the slides in the presentation were really offensive and saying things like that white people should try to be less white, which would mean being less arrogant, less oppressive, more humble, etc. And since the story broke, Coca-Cola has issued an official apology and disavowal, and even DiAngelo distanced herself from these slides, so I really don't know who made them or who thought these would be a good idea. There's a couple problems here. Obviously, number one, this is extremely divisive and unproductive. If the goal is to actually improve the workplace or society or individuals, then using this kind of rhetoric is both kind of sad and pretty dumb. But the bigger problem in my viewpoint is that it reinforces the idea that conservatives have of what the main problem of racism is. Because the larger issue is not individual, rude, hateful, prejudiced people. Sure, that's a thing that exists, but by and large, it's not socially acceptable to act that way. Systemic racism ties to the subconscious, implicit biases that we've been ingrained with, and how these biases affect decisions in court cases, in housing, in education, in the economy, in all the systems that enable our society to function and produce. So you can see how telling individual white people to be less oppressive is obviously not addressing those underlying issues. It's completely missing the actual point, and it's giving off some serious white guilt vibes. I do not feel guilty for being white, because if I did, how would that actually help a person of color? But you can see how this feeds into American conservative stereotypes, because many conservatives will say something along the lines of, libtards just want you to feel guilty for being white.
Exhibit A!
And for the most part, conservatives either can't or won't comprehend that systemic racism is more of the problem than personal racism, which is why they say things like,
I'm colorblind. I have black friends though. If you want racism to go away, then stop talking about it.
an ish like this slideshow just reiterates those wrong beliefs. So please, people, stop it. Get it together, get it right. So we're gonna move on, and next up is Mr. Potato Head. It was recently revealed that Hasbro, the company that owns this franchise, is taking off Mr. and just calling the toy Potato Head. Maybe this is evidence that the right-wing internet troll I used to be still lingers in some corner of my mind. But when I read this headline, I assumed that maybe like a non-binary Twitter mob forced Hasbro into doing this. But as it turns out, they're just taking Mr. off so that it will be more inclusive of all the characters in the Potato Head world. And Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head will still be around. Once again, right-wingers are magnifying this to make some point about the culture war that they're so freaking obsessed with. And I'd like to put in the video a post that basically sums it up. So I want to share a few final thoughts. Many people like to view the world in binaries, as an us versus them, because it's easier. Nuance is harder to process. It's not straightforward. Many liberals see all conservatives as being cruel or unempathetic. Many conservatives see liberals as being these idealistic Looney Tunes. Stories like the Coca-Cola one would seem to confirm that bias. But there's so many stories like the Mr. Potato Head one, where they are grasping at straws and striving to fit things into their binary narrative and worldview. So just take all things with a grain of salt. Some things really are as bad as they seem, but a lot of things aren't. So anyways, thanks for listening, guys, and God bless you all.